Welcome to the Future is Gold podcast series, hosted by Alexandra Cosma. We believe in empowering you to take control of your future so you can live the life that you want. And we do that by allowing you to buy, send, spend, earn and secure the world's oldest currency, gold, while being supported by modern technology. At Nuggets, our mission is clear. We're making gold accessible for everyone by giving you the knowledge and expertise needed to make informed and smart financial decisions that benefit you.
Hi, and welcome back to the 17th episode of the Future is Gold podcast. I'm your host, Alexandra. With an average annual growth rate of nearly 25%, the financial technology industry is among the fastest growing worldwide. Fintech is changing the finance industry and impacting the way that consumers track, control, and access their finances, providing a faster and more efficient service and making financial management much more convenient. On this episode, we'll take a look at the future of the fintech industry. I'm joined by arguably one of the best men for the job, Chris Titley. With over 20 years of experience in the financial services, Chris is the Director of Sub11, a new home for information on fintech in Australia. Chris, it's really great to have you here on the podcast. Talk to me a little bit about Sub11. What was your aim when you were setting it up?
Thanks, Alex, and thanks for the lovely and kind introduction. I have, as mentioned, 20-odd years experience in equity markets in Australia, and during that journey, have done a number of podcasts and met a number of companies along the way. But what interested me in 2020 was the idea of financial services to the future, having worked in the industry and mixing that with a sort of a technology overlay. I was excited about what was happening. And lo and behold, it's sort of 2 years after that, I set up Sub11 in a joint venture with Melbourne-based Dom Pym, who was the co-founder of Upbank. And he and I are putting together a business, Sub11, which aims to help fintechs through what is probably going to be a pretty rough time in 2023 from a funding point of view. But our ultimate aim is to assist fintechs from their content side of things, to tell their stories to a wider audience, which potentially could change the outcomes in regards to funding or exposure or customers or joint ventures or partnerships. So put together a website, a podcast, a newsletter, all to do with fintech here in Australia.
Well, Sub11 is definitely, I think, a one-stop shop for all of those latest fintech news and updates. And you're really doing a fantastic job of keeping us all in the know. For our listeners who want to check out what Chris has been working on, you can check out sub11.com.au to see all the latest Australian fintech news. I think, Chris, many of our Nuggets listeners, they might be sitting here listening to us talking and thinking right now, exactly what is fintech? Because, it's a very catchy, buzzy word at the moment, but a lot of people don't actually know what it means. And if we just break it down simply, it's a fusion of the words financial and technology, which really speaks to what it aims to do: use new tech to improve and automate the use and delivery of financial services. Chris, I'd love to hear from you. Why do you think fintech is such an important aspect of our daily lives today?
It's a great question. And just on that topic of fintech, it is a broad-based term. I really don't have a definition of it. Some people argue with particular companies, what isn't fintech? It's really just a category to determine that it's not other things, like it's not resource tech or it's not sports tech or space tech, for instance. But it's, broadly speaking, for me, anything to do with financial services, insurance, real estate potentially, as well as accounting tech. But it is important because money does exist. It is part of our lives. It is part of everyday living. People do have bills. People want to save money. They do want to invest. They think about their super. They think about digital currencies such as cryptocurrency. So it is ingrained in our lives. Anything to do with money and payments, the incomings and outgoings. People work for money, broadly speaking. So look, there is an everyday impact. It's not 24/7, but certainly people do have a bank and they do want to borrow money. So there's lots of different use cases for financial technology or the advancement of technology within financial services.
Absolutely. I think most people, they probably already used fintech today, perhaps without even knowing it. It's often hiding in plain sight, behind every online transaction or tap of your credit card. These little processes are working behind the scenes. Chris, what do you think are common fintechs that consumers might use, perhaps without even knowing that they're using them?
Yeah, you made a good point there about online transactions, and Stripe is probably one of the more well-known fintechs in the world globally that helps process payments, whether you be on Shopify or ordering online for various websites. They'll probably use a payments processor like Stripe. If you go, as you mentioned, into into maybe a physio or a doctor, you might tap and you might see a Tyro terminal, for instance, as a terminal provider. Afterpay is a common one that people use that's been very successful in the Australian landscape in the last couple of years. Certainly when you go and maybe use a digital bank like Upbank, or even some of the other digital banks out there, or use an exchange for cryptocurrency. These are all businesses that are sort of broadly based in fintech, and even things like micro investing seems to be a popular trend at the moment. Again, this is a trend which perhaps can delve into children's education, like Spriggy, pocket money apps, for instance, and Kit by Commonwealth Bank. So there's lots of different apps out there to do with money and savings and investments, etc. One of the other ones which people probably don't recognize as much as when you go for a mortgage or a home loan or a personal loan, that broadly speaking, there'll be fintech companies that are powering that risk assessment behind the scenes and giving you good smarts and good credibility around risk assessment for companies that actually want to take you on as a customer for a loan.
Well, the list really is endless. You mentioned so many different apps and products there that we do often all use. And definitely with the fintech sector attracting $50 billion in investment every year and rising, we're just going to see more growth and innovation in this space. I think we've definitely seen with fintech that Australians are early adopters. Chris, how would you describe today's fintech landscape in Australia?
Yeah, today is very different to the last couple of years, really, to be honest. I mean, in terms of a funding environment, the sector has received over $1 billion of funding for the last 3 years, but it's materially down from 2021. So we've sort of seen the rise during the global health pandemic of various trends, one being that cash is probably no longer accepted as the preferred payment method, and that came from sort of government warnings about germs and spreading physical cash. We've also seen the rise of products like buy now, pay later through the last couple of years, and also things like open banking and the focus on personal balance sheets, particularly during COVID, and also now we're sitting here in Australia with 9 consecutive interest rate rises. So the focus on the personal balance sheet is certainly very, very strong. So look, the segment has grown in terms of number of companies over the last couple of years. But in terms of funding, we're probably heading into what is a subdued funding environment. So it's going to be tougher for fintechs, and that's probably not alone in fintech. Probably broader technology companies investors are focusing on capital efficiency more than growth at all costs, which has happened over the last couple of years. So I'm excited about the fintech industry. I believe it's in its infancy here in Australia, but at the same time, we've got to be wary of the macro conditions and wary of what's happening overseas, which is probably seeing some sort of subdued in terms of weakening of the funding environment.
Well, you're definitely doing great work then by shining a light on what's going on in Australia, and that will help with a lot of startups and smaller fintechs as well getting funding, and as you said, making changes in those spaces. We spoke about the way the general public has changed using cash and moving over to more of a digital spending method on our last episode, and that was Cashless Society, our 16th episode. With Trent Daniel from Azipay. If you haven't had a chance to listen to that yet, go and check it out. I think what exactly fintech covers, you mentioned it's kind of changing, and it's a broad topic, and I think it's definitely growing daily with instances of use just across about almost every industry nowadays. Chris, how is fintech shaping banking and finance specifically?
Again, a really good question. And you've seen over the last couple of years, the big 4 banks predominantly set up their venture capital arms. Westpac has got Reinventure, ANZ's got 1835i, Commonwealth Bank's got X15, and NAB's got NAB Ventures. And this is a sort of a silo vehicle for the banks to set up to invest and partner and sort of incubate fintechs to solve problems for their own banks, and also probably a broader brush as well. So that's a really interesting trend from a banking point of view. And you've seen the rise of internet banking, broadly speaking, over the last 10 or 15 years, that people have accepted that. And people now do their banking on their phones as opposed to internet banking. And likewise, when it comes to payment, as you mentioned before. So from a bank's point of view, I think that they're ever evolving in terms of being on the offense when it comes to new technology and potentially acquiring some fintechs. We've seen NAB acquire a digital bank for $200 million. You've seen Westpac invest in Zip back in the early days. So there is more and more of that going on. And mentioning of back into what's happening in fintech here in 2023, I do think 2023 and 2024 will be a time when the big four banks really put their foot down on fintech and look to see what's out there to either partner or acquire with various problems or various new elements of technology that they might not be able to sort of move suddenly or move quickly into, of which their customers are demanding. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic to see where the big four banks play. But yeah, the idea of digital home loans and digital mortgage, digital lending, quick payments. I know Commonwealth Bank's doing a lot of work with budgeting through this time when there's a lot of uncertainty around when interest rates will stop. So they're going to get more involved, and I'm excited to see what they're going to get up to.
It's certainly interesting times. And I think many people, they might just associate the word fintech with small startups. And I think it's really, really interesting that now, as you mentioned, all the major banks in Australia are partnering with fintech companies or launching fintech apps. And it's all really about, streamlining that customer experience, making things much more simplified. Chris, how has banking fundamentally changed perhaps since the introduction of fintech?
Well, I think it all comes down to, as you said, the two words customer service, and what can the customer achieve by being loyal to their bank. I mean, if a bank is slightly lower or slower in their tech, I think in these instances these days, people will probably just go, oh, this is horrible, and move off, because people demand a level of a lot of pace and of efficiency. It wasn't that long ago where you transfer money on a Friday night, going out to dinner, and the people would get it on Tuesday, or you'd pay a bill, for instance, and it wouldn't be received by then. So payments have come forward with OSCO and instant payments. We've seen the likes of the tap and go, as you mentioned, and the ability to move money quickly and more freer. But it does come back to what the customers want. Some of the big four banks took a while to adapt to Apple Pay as a payment method on their phone. Again, probably a non-fintech company, Apple, coming into the market to do things a bit differently. But people have iPhones and people wanted to pay on Apple Pay. So the banks had to adapt to that. So I think there will be a number of trends coming forward where people go, I need this service, I want to help, I want to borrow money quicker, I want to be able to make more informed and better decisions. And I think that's where fintech will come in from an everyday point of view of banking. But in terms of applications and technology moving forward, it's going to be a very exciting time to see where things like AI and things like the blockchain can play into various different elements of efficiency for some of these large organizations.
And I'd love to talk to you a little bit about AI and these type of new technologies. The fintech industry is certainly changing rapidly. Fintech magazine has put together some predictions for the year 2050. I'm just going to read a few of these to you. They mentioned usage of technologies such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, algorithms. They suggest that perhaps cryptocurrencies could even take over fiat currencies, development of a metaverse, and even interplanetary payments. Chris, these all sound like things way into the future. What do you expect to see perhaps in this space in the next 5 to even 10 years?
Yeah, look, it's interesting to watch some of the technologies advance. When people ask me like what's going to be the next Stripe or the next Afterpay, etc., my answer generally is I don't know if it's out there yet. It probably doesn't exist yet, but will exist. I mean, look at the rise of ChatGPT over the last 3 to 6 months. This company that's sort of been built, brewing behind the scenes, and then now everyone's using it. And there's fastest to 100 million users or whatever it might be, and it's all to do with AI. But in terms of banking, I think it just comes down to probably more personalization, more knowing the customer, and really kind of using those tools and AI and various bits to inform people of habits to basically a bit more on top of their finances. Yeah, for me, I think personally, I'd love an app that sort of monitors all your bills and what's coming in at what particular cycle that is and when it's coming, and a lot of prompting to do that. I think there'll be more on the risk assessed or risk-based pricing in terms of lending and being more dynamic with people and making things a little bit faster. Yeah, the spending and savings. I mean, if I asked you how much money you saved or spent last year, it's a question people go, I actually don't really have too much of an idea, but those little tools can help people. So I think the use of blockchain and the use of cryptocurrencies, as you mentioned, might become more mainstream in the future, particularly with artificial intelligence. And it's really going to be customer driven about, wow, I can do this with this particular institution. Can all the others follow? So yeah, it's hard to predict trends. So I'm excited about technology and the way it can change the future of banking. But let's just wait and see to see what the customers actually really want, whether it's just a gimmicky thing or whether it's actually going to be a long-standing process that most banks need to adopt.
Exactly. And I love that this industry, it really does go back always to just elevating that customer experience. And as you said, customer-driven solutions. So, solving those needs that people have. And it's a good one that you mentioned about having sort of something that collates all your saving data, all your spending data, all of your bills. Good idea. You heard it here first. If anyone's looking.
If there's a startup out there, I'm happy to talk to them. Yeah.
Come and talk to Chris. This industry is certainly gearing up to go to the next level. And Chris, what would you say are fintech solutions that you expect to be perhaps common practice in the future?
Yeah, I mean, on that topic, I think that real kind of understanding and education of finance and balance sheet. I mean, I've got 3 young boys, and they question money, they question things about that. From a school point of view, I think that there's probably not a huge amount of talking in and around money from the curriculum point of view, but I do think that's important. I do think that's changing in terms of the real inherent focus on equity in someone's home or the balance sheet strength of people. Because I do think at this moment, with an unprecedented 9 consecutive interest rates, possibly 10, possibly 11, possibly 12, we don't know. People actually have to understand what that means to them. And I do think there's a big education process to that. And everyone's got a different view of money, which is kind of makes it a little bit difficult. Some people say they save 10% of their income, and other people say they don't. And other people say you've got to invest in shares, and others say in property. So there is a lot of subjectiveness around the place. But I do think that the more tools and resources that one can have when they find themselves in a bit of a pickle, I think is probably going to be very, very prominent and probably common in the future.
Absolutely. I think, the more education that we can get out there in the industry, the better, especially for the younger generation, as you mentioned. Chris, a big question that's out there now is how fintechs will be overseen in those financial regulation circles. This is a rapidly evolving area, as we mentioned. And I really think regulatory rulemakers are really trying to keep up with the continued fintech innovations. What do you think perhaps are the challenges that governments and financial institutions face in keeping pace with all of the rapid development and changes in this industry?
Yeah, it's going to be tough for them. And I mean, we've seen Senate inquiries and understanding workshops, etc., for things like buy now, pay later, which came out of nowhere and then sort of took off. And it's like, is this lending? Is it not? Is it credit card? Is it bad? Is it good? And there's a lot of market education around that, and a lot of bodies getting involved to really regulate and sort of understand what that is. And that was probably about 5 years ago that happened. And now we're seeing more discussions around the positives and negatives of cryptocurrency and decentralized autonomous organizations and the setups of that and use cases with the blockchain. So I think from a government's point of view, they need to be open and aware of what is happening with these technologies, and they need to engage with industry leaders at a very sort of objective point of view, and then everyone's probably going to be talking their own book up in terms of what they're trying to do. But in the end, I think there needs to be some sort of common ground with market participants and governments and other business leaders within that space to say this is a framework or this is what we see to be guiding towards, as opposed to sort of any sort of quick and fast blanket no or blanket whatever it might be, only in circumstances where that may warrant that. But I think collaboration and a little bit of sort of understanding of what's happening from a government point of view is the way forward, and I see no reason why that shouldn't happen.
Absolutely. I think many governments are recognising fintech as a means to deliver perhaps positive social and economic outcomes, things like increased financial inclusion and access. Obviously, we mentioned it earlier, improved efficiency in the industry, and also promoting that healthy competition in the market as well. Chris?
Yeah, and even on that topic, that responsible lending just sort of goes back and forth in terms of what banks are trying to do, because they tighten the belts on responsible lending for a bit, and then there was a court case that came out that sort of loosened it a little bit, and then COVID, they loosened it, and then maybe they're tightening it. So, there's lots of back and forth in regards to something as just as simple as, borrowing money to buy a house.
And you mentioned the word collaborate, which I really like. How do you think that governments and financial institutions can perhaps best collaborate effectively with the fintech industry?
Look, I think you definitely need regulation on various things, and that's why we've got APRA and we've got ASIC and various other institutional bodies for governing banks and governing licenses and behaviours, and particularly from a financial advisor point of view, and various exams that people sit. So you do need a framework, but I do feel if there's some sort of framework that makes other people uneasy, that there needs to be some sort of collaboration or workshop around why that is. And some sort of set of rules. Technology moves so fast. So we've got to admit that businesses move fast. They want to move at lightning speed. They want to do things that may go around the normal of the thinking outside the square and doing things a little bit different. But comes back to money. It comes back to making sure that the society is well protected on various fronts, and that they're not, people are not just willingly putting in, $50,000 or their life savings into something which may not be adhere to their risk profile because they may have seen something on, some advertising or some misleading on social media, for instance. So there needs to be some rules and regulations. I do think, as you mentioned the word collaboration before, I do think that is important. But there has to be a broader approach to this, but also we have to, governments need to be nimble in regards to being aware of these processes and efficiencies and understand them to make an informed decision.
Well, I think we're certainly gearing up for a really exciting decade. And Chris, thank you very much for all your insights on this episode. We looked at current developments in the fintech industry, forecasted trends and predictions for the future, and also how governments and financial institutions can collaborate effectively with the fintech industry. Chris, before we say goodbye, do you have any final comments or thoughts for our listeners?
Oh, just that I'm excited about the industry. It's not going away. It will go through its ups and downs. There'll be companies that unfortunately will probably fail. There'll be companies that will grow fast, etc. But for me, it's never ending in terms of the entrepreneurial spirit on how things can become more efficient to do with money and the movement of money. So I'm long the future. I think it's going to be exciting, and I'm really, really enjoying what I'm doing in fintech and meeting the wonderful people within the ecosystem, and hopefully that continues.
Well, thanks again, Chris. Fintech is now so pervasive in financial services that consumers and businesses alike are increasingly turning to imaginative combinations of software, hardware, and data to create and deliver both new and traditional financial products and services. Fintech is firmly entangled in the fabric of our financial society, and it appears that its influence will only grow in the future. If you want to partner with a gold-backed platform that can help you utilize digital gold, Nuggets is your trusted provider. Check out nuggets.com to kickstart your fintech gold journey. And don't forget to check out sub11.com.au for all the latest fintech trends and updates in Australia.
Thanks for listening to the Future is Gold podcast. For links and contact details relevant to this episode, please see the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast series so you'll know when the next episode is live. And follow Nuggets on social media for more gold standard content. Information contained within this series is general in nature and not directed to your personal situation. So please reach out to us or your financial expert for a more tailored approach. This podcast is a Story League production.